The pick tool is used for selecting objects, rotating, that sort of thing. So if we had some text here, I can use the pick tool to click and drag the text. If I click again, it'll change to rotation and skew handles. So if I rotate it, it's going to rotate based off of this center mark, the angle of rotation. And you can also see up here that it gives us an angle. So if I go back to 0, hit enter there. The other is skew, so if I click and drag to the right, it'll skew it. That way if I needed to create some sort of italicized effect, I could do that. You also have skew handles for top and bottom if you need to. I'll just undo that since we're not going to need it. And I'll undo the last one as well. If you needed to change this where it rotates from, you can click and drag that to anywhere you want, and that would become where it's rotating from. If you click and hold Control while you do that, it'll snap to one of the corners or midpoints. As you're rotating, if you hold Control while you do that, it'll actually rotate the object in 15-degree increments. Same thing applies with skew. If you hold Control, it'll snap to 15-degree increments. If you want to clear your selection, you just click anywhere on the white blank space of your workspace, and that will clear your selection. Down here you'll see there's nothing selected. If I click on it again, it'll show you that I've got artistic text selected. If you need to select more than one object, so let's say we had a rectangle here, we can grab the rectangle. Holding Shift, we can then select the text, and now we can see that we've got two objects selected. So if we wanted to, we could do something like centering the text and the box. You can hit C on the keyboard to center left to right, E on the keyboard to center top to bottom. If you wanted to align it to the bottom instead, you can hit B. If you wanted to align it to the top, you can hit T, L for left, and R for right. It's moving the box because I selected the text first. If I were to clear my selection, grab the text first, Shift select the box, then it would actually move my text instead because I selected that box last. So whatever you select last is your target. When you're selecting rectangles or shapes or anything like this that do not have a fill on them, in order to select them, you have to click right on the outline. So the tip of your cursor should be right on the outline to select it. If I click anywhere inside here, it doesn't select that unless I have Treat All Objects as Filled selected. Then anytime I click inside here, it would. If this box were to actually be filled in, I'll double click here and give it a fill color. I'll give it a different fill color so we can actually see the text. Because the text is behind this red object, we're not able to see it. So there's two ways you can deal with that. You can either go to wireframe by coming in and clicking on here, hitting V on the keyboard does the same thing. That way we can click on the text. Or if we go back to enhanced view, if you know that it's there, but it's behind this object, you can hold Alt while you click, and it will dig behind and select anything that's directly behind it. But you would also have to make sure that whatever you're clicking on, that you're clicking on the outline of it there in order for it to select. Alternately, you can just move this to the back of the layer and then you'd be able to see it again. Occasionally, if you have more than one object, your objects will actually be grouped together, especially if you import something. So if we had the text I'm going to shift select the rectangle here and group them together just to show you how it works. If they were a group, when you go to select it, it's going to select it as a group. It selects the entire group. But if you wanted to get to just the text inside that group, you can hold Control and click, and it would then select only the text. Your handles become circles instead of rectangles or squares so that you can tell that this is nested inside of a group. You can also see over in the Objects Docker that we have a group of two objects. It's got our text and our rectangle that are inside that group. You can also see when you click on this down here that it's a group of two objects. And on the property bar, it gives you the ungroup options, which also gives you a hint that it's been grouped. A group allows you to keep objects together, but have them maintain their individual properties. So the text is text and it's black, the rectangle is a rectangle and it's red, and so they can keep their special properties of being a rectangle and being text because they're in a group. If we ungrouped them and instead did something called combining, then this will no longer be text and this will no longer be a rectangle object. They are now down here classified as a curve. When you convert something to curves, in order to manipulate and edit it, you would then have to use the shape tool. That gives you the nodes that you can then play with. I'm going to go ahead and undo that to get it back to the individual objects. And this way I'll show you another way of selecting multiple objects. Instead of holding or clicking one, holding shift and clicking the other, what you can also do is create a marquee selection. So with your pick tool, you click anywhere out here in the white and drag a box all the way around both, and then it will select both. If I dragged and only went to the end of the text, it would select the text and not the rectangle. So if this were to the back again and we weren't able to see it, but we knew it was there, we could select it by clicking out here, dragging almost to the end of the rectangle and letting go there, and that way it would select it and we could move it forward. If you want to select all of the different objects on your workspace, you can double click the pick tool and it will select anything that's in your workspace. If this rectangle weren't a red rectangle and instead was a panel, I'm just going to click the frosted outline button because it's a very simple way to create an easy panel. The panel is multiple objects. So you've got the inside frosted area of the panel, then you've got the outside outline of the panel. And if it were to be a double line panel, you'd have even more lines there to worry about. But if we wanted to select each piece of this, you can click on one, shift select the other. Sometimes if we click on one and hold shift and go to select the other, because snapping is on, it's actually getting in the way of my cursor to touch this other one. So sometimes it's easier to just hold Alt, click and drag, and clicking and dragging will create a blue box that anything that touches that blue box then gets selected. So if I click out here, hold Alt, click and drag, because the text is now touching that blue box, everything will get selected there as well. But occasionally, it's easier to just hold Alt and click and drag and not have to be so precise with where you're clicking and what you're clicking on. If we hover over the shape tool, you'll notice that it doesn't give a keyboard shortcut. There's not a keyboard shortcut specifically set for the pick tool. And instead, if we were in a different tool, like the shape tool or the freehand tool, any of these other tools, if you are in that mode, you can just click spacebar and it will toggle between that and the pick tool. If you hit spacebar again, it goes back to the last used tool. That works as long as you're not in text. If you're in text mode, obviously hitting spacebar is going to create a space, and so that will not then take you back to the pick tool, so you'd have to click on it again in order to get it selected. But if you hit spacebar again, it will go back to the text tool, back to where you were, because that was the last used tool. I just hit delete on the keyboard to delete that. If I Control Z to undo, I can also right click on it if I want to, and it will give me options where I could then delete it as well. If you made a selection and dragged it, as you drag, you hold Control to constrain it to a straight line. I'm going to zoom out here with my mouse wheel and instead drag to the right. So as I drag to the right, you'll see I can freely go anywhere I want, but if I hold Control, then it stays in a straight line. So even if I move my mouse up and down, it's staying constrained to a straight line. If I go in this direction, it'll do the same thing. If I move my mouse left to right, it'll constrain it to a straight line up and down. So depending on which direction I'm going first is which way it's going to constrain. If I start going to the right first, it'll constrain that way. If I start going up first, it'll constrain that way. If I wanted to make a duplicate, let's say I wanted to duplicate this text, I can drag the text to the right, hold Control so that it stays in line, and then while I'm doing that, hit the right mouse button, and as soon as I hit the right mouse button and let go of it, it'll give me that plus sign for the cursor, and then I let go of my left mouse and let go of Control last. That way it'll make a duplicate for me. I'm going to hit F4 on my keyboard to zoom in a little bit more. Now if I click on text with the pick tool, it will let me select a different font from the font list, and it will change the entire line of text. By using the pick tool, you can actually select multiple objects of text at the same time. So if I click and drag around both of these, it has both of them selected, and I can change them to a different font, and it'll change both at the same time. This is useful. The pick tool anyway is useful for changing fonts, because as you do it, as you change, it changes on the fly. So if you're trying to match something specifically, you can switch between different fonts, and that would then get you a better match that way. One little thing to pay attention to is if we were to use a font, let's say this one here, how it says semi-bold right there. Because this one is semi-bold, if I were to switch it to another font like Optimus, it changes just fine. But if I undo and have multiple things selected and change to MD Optimus, it actually keeps this one as being bold. So that's just something to pay attention to if you ever accidentally see something being bold and you weren't expecting it. That's because it's keeping that bold. So we would just switch it back to not being bold anymore. Another thing to pay attention to is how you're selecting objects. Usually when you click with the pick tool, the very tip of your pick tool has to click on the object. So if I wanted to select this text, the tip would need to be inside the black area in order for that to get selected. If I were to click anywhere outside that black area, then it would actually select this piece of the panel instead. Unless I had clicked down here, which is the baseline. So that's actually an invisible line that you can't see unless you're highlighting over it. But that is an option to click down on the baseline, and it would select the text as well.